Today on Ask BRStv, we answer, why should I do water changes? Hey reefers, Randy here answering a pretty common question we see on the hashtag AskBRStv Facebook group, which in most cases shares a common theme of why do water changes? So today I'll give you the short and sweet answer to the benefits of doing water changes in your tank. Let me start first by addressing the larger debate about whether or not you should do water changes at all. I'd say that there are a percentage of reefers out there, particularly with older established tanks that operate on a pretty minimal water change schedule and are doing well, but that's almost always a result of a journey that started with a good water change schedule, which led to a reduced reliance on them as the tank matured. However, even with mature tanks, a good schedule for water changes can be like an insurance policy against all kinds of chemistry and contaminant issues that can build over time. So these are reasons that we suggest a good schedule as likely one of the most common elements of success for both that difficult 1 to 2 year phase, as well as a path to the even more successful 10-year plus tanks. First, and probably the most common reason, is a sort of tank insurance when it comes to maintaining or reducing buildup of unwanted contaminants like heavy metals, unknown chemicals, or even toxins from the corals by using filtered or purified fresh salt water to replace the old tank water. There's a variety of ways contaminants can get into your tank, like residue on your hands, contaminants in the tank additives, from the ambient air around the house, impurities in the food you feed, and more, which can be relatively mitigated by diluting them with water changes. Along with that, reefers also use regular water changes as an export method to manage unwanted nitrates and phosphate. For some, likely with smaller volume tanks, this may be the only export method needed to keep them within acceptable levels. However, for larger tanks, it's not likely the most ideal approach as the primary means of nitrate and phosphate management, simply from a dilution and ease or cost standpoint, but it can be a solid part of an overall tank maintenance rhythm. For those reefers who use 2-part for alkalinity and calcium supplementation, if not corrected for over time, there will be an increase in salinity since sodium chloride or salt is a byproduct of the unused sodium bicarbonate or carbonate and calcium chloride. Water changes are a great way to adjust for the rising salinity to keep the parameters more constant and stable. Finally, there is some benefit to water changes concerning trace elements, as you are adding some amount of them back into the water depending on the salt mix. However, in most cases, they are being consumed in larger amounts, and on a long enough timeline, they will likely deplete beyond what water changes can replenish. Yet with water changes, it will be a slower, more gradual depletion than without doing them at all. Really, when it comes down to it, the ultimate goal of water changes is to provide a long-term stability in the tank through consistency and purposeful changes to water chemistry over a longer period of time versus larger swings or shifts from trying to remedy the tank issues. That said, I'd also say that proper and regular water change schedules are more important in that first year or so of the tank, as younger tanks can be less forgiving on shifting parameters versus a 3-year or older mature tank with a more diverse biological ecosphere and mature corals. Okay, so should you do water changes? I'm going to go ahead and say here that if you are new to reefing and asking that question, then absolutely do them and be a part of a group of reefers with a much higher percentage of success. However, if you are a pro reefer with 2 to 3 years or more of success and a stable tank, you could consider reducing your water changes, but do be aware that you are also reducing the effectiveness of your insurance policy that has led you to its current results. How big and how frequent should the water changes be? I'd recommend that for a vast majority of reefers, tanks, and reefing habits, smaller consistent water changes are going to be ideal, and likely 10 to 15% per week is going to meet the needs of a majority of tanks out there. Not only are smaller, more frequent water changes easier to do in general, but they also serve another purpose of keeping stable parameters with rather slow changes to water chemistry versus larger, more drastic changes. So following that mentality, this is why I feel an auto water change setup is going to be the most ideal approach to a steady water change tank maintenance rhythm, as I not only get the benefit of consistency, but I also don't have to lug around any heavy buckets of water or spend multiple hours a week with water change maintenance. Finally, if weekly water changes are more difficult for you to keep up with or just aren't able to do them, I'd say that it's just fine to try and fit them in every couple of weeks or so. However, you may want to account for the longer period of time between changes with larger volume changes like 20% or more. Some reefers may want to even try to push that time between changes even further, like once a month or so, with larger volume changes like 40% or more, which won't likely prevent success. However, there are some additional considerations to take into account, like being careful to more closely match parameters like temp, alkalinity, calcium, pH, etc., as well as if larger percentage changes are even worth the effort of inherently being less easy than, say, a couple of 5-gallon buckets. Thanks for watching, and thank you, #AskBRStv Facebook community, for the great question. Many of these questions come from the community over at #AskBRStv, where reefers can get their questions answered from us and group members, often in real time. So click the link in the lower left to see what reefers are asking in the group, or ask a question of your own, and we'll see you next time on Ask BRStv.